Hello, Felix here. Welcome back to the Bethnal Archives. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, hello and welcome. I've been here for 30 years. I am an archivist, and here we are deep in London in an underground bunker run by the government where we archive all of the paranormal and weird ghostly stuff that goes on. Well, the halls of the archives have been whispering with secrets, even in the silence of the holiday season. Snow fell gently on the cobble streets, muffling footsteps and blanketing the world in an eerie calm. But behind the frost-covered windows, shadows flicker and voices long forgotten have risen in ghostly song. For this Christmas, the archive faced not only the memories of those who came before, but the spirits that refused to rest. From haunted churchyards to spectral gatherings, the world between the worlds was thinner than ever, and the dangers of the past threatened to spill into the present. So, I hope you've all had a fantastic Christmas. The team and I are back, and I've got some big news to share. The interim director has finally left, and after much deliberation, I've been informed that I'll be taking on the role as Archives Director. Yes, yours truly is now in charge of the beautiful chaos we call the Archives. So that means our lovely intern Joe here will now step into the role as a junior archivist. Not only that, but Joe will be taking on the outreach responsibilities twice a week. So don't fear, these lovely podcasts will still be coming your way. Right then, so on to today's story about the Christmas season beforehand and what's coming next in the new year. So, Christmas, a season, a time of joy, togetherness, and of course, the occasional spectral visit. This year has been no exception. The archives has been buzzing with reports, and I thought I'd like to share a few more of the peculiar cases we've documented over the Christmas period. Let's start with the classic. The headless coachman. Every Christmas Eve, without fail, he's been spotted on Old Toll Bridge just outside of the town. A few days ago, one of our investigators decided to check on the reports. The bridge is an eerie place, even without the ghost stories. Its stones are slick with frost and the air feels heavy, as if the place itself is holding its breath. Virgil arrived just before midnight, armed with his usual tools, and waited. And for a while the only sound was the rush of the river below. For then, there it was, the unmistakable clatter of hooves and wheels, and from the mist the coach emerged, just as people had described for decades. Apparently the driver sat tall and imposing on his perch, though his head was nowhere to be seen. The carriage shimmered almost as though it wasn't entirely there, and the scent of damp leather hung in the air. It passed by without incident, though he swore he could feel its presence linger, watching even after it disappeared. It is said that those who come across the bridge at the same time as the coachman risk being taken to the other side, though no one can quite agree on what that means. Well, clearly it didn't happen to Virgil, because he's still here. In fact, he's at the back having a coffee with Imogen. Now, on to another well-loved ghost of the season. This is the White Lady of Lantern Hill. Now, Lantern Hill is a cute little town just past Enfield, still part of Greater London, and it's always been a symbol of sorrow and loss during the darkest nights of the year. Lantern Hill is a cold, lonely place in winter, its paths shrouded in fog, and its old stones are covered in frost. Witnesses have often described her as tall and graceful, with a flowing white robe that seems to shimmer like moonlight. But it's her cries that linger, the sound of pure heartbreak echoing through the valleys. The first time she was encountered, they were struck by the sheer cold that she brought with her. No fire could chase away the chill, and the air smelt faintly of frozen earth. Legend says that she's waiting for her lost love, who perished in a snowstorm centuries ago. And I mean, it must have been centuries ago for there to be a snowstorm that bad in England, that's for sure. While others say she warns of impending danger, I believe she's simply trapped in her grief. Whatever the truth, there's a sadness to her presence that stays with you long after she's gone. Now, of course, not all spirits during Christmas are tragic or nostalgic. Some are downright malicious, like the Yuletide wraiths. Now, these are rare and often only occur in various specific, particular circumstances, and normally in buildings that are grade 2 listed and grade 1. But when they do appear, they're not easily forgotten. They're like these tall, cloaked figures with glowing hollow eyes and awful skeletal grins. They don't really attack outright, they kind of hover in the corners of the room at night, their laughter quiet at first, growing louder as they feed on the despair of those around them. One family, a few years ago, and reported that they heard this laughter coming from the attic on Christmas Eve. When they finally mustered the courage to investigate, they found nothing but the smell of scorched wood and a pile of charred mistletoe. For they bring bad fortune to anyone who encounters them, a curse that often lingers into the new year. So what happened there was they approached it, they saw the entity, but before the entity could do anything, it had been banished. Most probably from all the happiness and joy that the family had brung with them. Then there's the poltergeists of presence. Now, our liaison in Salem have often said that during the Christmas period they often have mischievous poltergeists who are attracted to all the joy and the gifting period. Now, I don't agree with this. I believe that these are actually nymphs or sorts of fey spirits or fey creatures that are quite mischievous around this time of year. Anyway, I'll tell you what happened. A family in Whitestone reported waking up on Christmas morning to find all of their gifts rearranged in a pyramid, perfectly balanced. They could smell fresh pine in the air despite not having a real tree, and so they said these poltergeists are drawn to emotional energy of gift giving, feeding on the chaos and excitement of the season. Well, let's think about it. Fresh pine that you can smell on a tree that wasn't there, that sounds like the lingers of an interdimensional gateway into the different dimension where fey realms exist, where they could have come through. And do poltergeists really arrange things in a perfectly balanced pyramid, specifically gifts, and not just destroy everything else in the room? No, of course not. These are clearly some type of fey. Anyway, agree to disagree. As we move on past Christmas though, we head towards the new year, and of course the activity doesn't stop there, it changes. So if Christmas was about memory and nostalgia, New Year is about transition, and that makes it a particularly dangerous time for the paranormal. So let me tell you about some of the more notorious hotspots of the area. There's St Mary's Churchyard in Whitechapel. Every New Year's Eve, just before midnight, reports flood in of ghostly chanting rising from the gravestones. Witnesses over the years have often described a shadowy figure that moves among the tombstone. Its form was vague and shifting, almost caught in the cold wind. Some say it's just a pranksters with a cloak and on a stick, but people who have been there, especially the homeless who don't have anywhere else to go, say that the air grows heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, even when the ground is frozen solid. Now, St Mary's has a dark history, one that seems to awaken every year at the same time, and I have some documents here that say in the 17th century it was rumoured to be a burial site of a heretical sect. Now, this group practiced forbidden rituals to bind their souls to the mortal plane. While most historians just say this is all just folklore, the sheer volume of sightings in the churchyard suggests there's more to this story. Now, we do have lots of reports here about this story, but they're all unconfirmed, so I will be overseeing as well. We will be going down there on New Year's Eve. Hopefully we'll get paid overtime for that. And we'll see for ourselves and we'll report back here. Right then. Yes, so witnesses describe always the same thing. So it stands at the edge of the graveyard watching, never speaks, never interacts. Its presence is impossible to ignore though. There's even a picture of it somewhere. It doesn't quite come out right on the camera, but you can see it. It looks like this ancient being, something that doesn't belong in this world. Well, I've always wondered if it's drawn to the cusp between the old year and the new, that moment of transition when time feels fragile. So, This year, the Archives has been preparing for the night. We've placed some warning spells at key locations around the city. We specifically put some at St Mary's Churchyard, we put some at the bridges, we've put some even right in the middle of the market square in London. But these charms are subtle, invisible to the naked eye, but they act as a barrier, making it harder for malevolent spirits to cross into inhabited areas. Joe has been working tirelessly to craft protective talismans from iron and rowan wood. We've distributed these to residents who live near certain hotspots, especially those brave enough or foolish enough to enter churchyards at night. While these talismans won't stop the strongest entities, they do offer a solid layer of defense. We're also planning on a ritual cleansing on December 30th. It's a delicate process involving the burning of sage, frankincense and juniper, all as well as the recitation of an old protection hymn passed down through the archives. The goal is to stabilise the energy in the areas, making it harder for spirits to manifest in the first place. And for those who insist on being out during the festivities, I do offer this advice. Stay in well-lit areas, for spirits are less likely to appear where light is abundant. You can also carry a pinch of salt, simple but effective against weaker entities. Now. New Year's is a time for hope and renewal, but it's also a time for risk. The spirits drawn to the thresholds are unpredictable. Some are harmless while others are not so much, so do stay vigilant, stay safe. Now, one of the most chilling incidents I have documented took place in the heart of Soho, in the narrow streets of Chinatown. On New Year's Eve, just a few years ago, it's a phenomenon we've come to refer as the Shadow Congregation, as a name as ominous as the entity itself. This is not a restless spirit or fleeting apparition. The Shadow Congregation is deliberate, reoccurring, and far too organised for comfort. Its appearances are tied to the turning of the year, as it thrives on the liminality of the moment when one year ends and another begins. It began with a man we would call Richard. He's no stranger to the strange, having grown up hearing stories of Soho's darker corners, but like many, he dismissed them as urban legends. On one New Year's Eve, perhaps emboldened by the festive spirit, or far too many drinks, he decided to explore the alleyways of Chinatown, where the phenomena had been most frequently reported. He described the atmosphere as unnerving from the start. Chinatown was usually vibrant and alive with colour and sound, but it felt muted. The lanterns above swayed gently in the wind that seemed to come from nowhere, and the usual aroma of street food was replaced by a faint, metallic tang. The streets themselves seemed emptier than they should have been, as the city was holding its breath. But by the time Richard finally reached the alley off of Gerrard Street around 11:45, the space became narrow and suffocatingly quiet. It was as though the sound has been swallowed, the air turned bitterly cold, and that's when he felt it, the sensation of being watched. Not by a single pair of eyes, but something vast and formless, something that didn't see him but seemed to weigh on him, judge him. The first sign of this came as a sound, a faint whispering that seemed to come from every direction. At first, Richard thought it was the wind, but as the whispers grew louder, forming a rhythm, a cadence that felt almost like chanting. The language, if it could even be called that, was unrecognisable, sharp, guttural and ancient. And then shadows around him began to move. These figures emerged from the darkness one by one, forming a loose circle at the ends of the alley. Richard described them as humanoid shapes, making shifting smoke, edges constantly dissolving and reforming. They moved with purpose, yet their presence felt unnatural, as though they existed just outside of our reality. Against his better judgment, Richard stepped closer, his flashlight trembling in his grip. He noticed that the ground beneath him felt wrong, cold in some places and then warm in others, as if the alley itself was alive. And then the chanting grew louder, deafening, and just as the clock struck midnight, it stopped, fell silent, and that's when the central figure appeared. The entity stepped out of the darkness, impossibly tall. Richard estimated it at least 8 feet. Cloaked in tattered black and seemed to writhe and shift as though alive. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a void, an absence that drew the light around it. Richard described the sensation as looking Richard described the sensation of looking at it unbearable, as though the longer he stared, the more it unravelled something inside him. The smaller shadows turned towards the tall figure, their movements synchronized, almost reverent. Then the figure raised one long, spindly arm, ending in elongated fingers that glimmered faintly in the dim light. It pointed directly at Richard. Frozen in terror, Richard said he felt as though something passed between them in that moment, a connection, a making of sorts. His fear finally broke, and then he turned and ran, leaving his flashlight and a flask behind. The chanting resumed behind him, louder and more chaotic than ever, chasing him out of the alley. When he reached the safety of the main street, Richard noticed two strange things. His watch had stopped exactly at midnight, and the scarf he'd been wearing was gone, as though the entity had taken something from him. When Richard came to the archives the next day, he was pale, shaking. He insisted he could still feel the entity's gaze, as though it left a mark on him. We decided to investigate the alley weeks later. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but further in, where Richard had seen the circle, we found scorch marks etched into the grounds in precise overlapping patterns. The air there carried the same metallic tang, and the ambient temperature fluctuated wildly. No electronic devices functioned properly near the site, and attempts to photograph the scorch marks yielded only distorted images. Since we've come to understand the shadow congregation as a recurring phenomena, we've tied it specifically to the new year. Its purpose remains unclear, but its behaviour suggests intent, a gathering of power, or a ritual whose function we can only guess at. The tall figure, the leader or central entity, is the key, but its nature defies all attempts at classification. What we do know is this: encounters with the shadow congregation are rare, but those who witness it often report lasting effects, paranoia, recurring nightmares, and the sense of being watched. Some even claim to find personal items missing, as though the entity takes something intangible yet deeply personal. And so, moving on. With my appointment as Archives Director, I've had a lot of time to think about what the future holds for us. Now, while part of me wishes we could open these lovely archives up to the public, after all, the stories could inspire and educate. But let's face it, also terrify. The reality is, as a government-run facility, security and secrecy is our number one mandate. That said, there's plenty of room for growth, internally at least, and I want to ensure that the archives doesn't just preserve the past, but evolves to meet the challenges of the future. So, here's what I've been planning. One of my first projects is to start compiling a series of internal books, guides if you will. These won't be just dry manuals, but a combination of practical knowledge and first-hand experiences from myself and the team. These will focus on recounting some of our most significant cases, not just stories, but as detailed reports on what we've encountered, how we responded, and most importantly, what we learned. There's so much knowledge we've gained over the years that risks being lost without proper documentation, and these books will serve both as a historical record and a training tool for future archivists. Another guide I'm drafting will focus on safety measures for handling paranormal phenomena, from basic precautions like carrying iron or salt to more advanced rituals for containment. These procedures need to be standardized and easily accessible for anyone working in the archives. It's one thing to know the theory, it's another to have a clear, actionable steps when poltergeists start rearranging the filing cabinets. On our record-keeping methods, they are thorough, but they're rather odd. I'm working on streamlining the way we log cases, artifacts and incidents. That means creating a system that allows for cross-referencing of patterns, whether it's seasonal activity, recurring entities, or hotspots of paranormal energy. For example, we've had multiple reports of spectral carolers over the years, but until now, those cases have been scattered across various sections of our library. By categorizing this information, we can start to identify trends that might help us predict future occurrences. And I'm also looking into a more efficient method of cataloguing our artifacts. Some of these items are dangerous, others are just strange, but all of them need proper handling procedures. A mislabeled cursed locket is the kind of mistake I'd rather not see repeated. Now, for our eternal HR of paranormal challenges. There's still obviously the human element, or in our case, the human and paranormal element. Working in the archives is unlike any other job, and what it brings is unique challenges. How do you handle the stress of a persistent haunting in your workplace? What do you do when an artifact seems to have developed a liking for you or refuses to let go, literally? One of my goals is to implement an internal support system for dealing with these situations. This includes setting up regular training sessions for handling high-stress encounters and creating a dedicated space where staff can decompress after a particularly intense case. I also want to establish a mentoring program. New hires and even seasonal archivists should feel supported, especially when dealing with phenomena that defies explanation. Sometimes just hearing that someone else had faced the same thing and survived is enough to keep you grounded. And of course, there is a legacy for future archivists. Ultimately, my vision is about leaving the archive stronger than I found it. I want the future directors, future archivists, and even pure future interns to have the tools, the knowledge, and the support they need to do this work safely and effectively. The paranormal world isn't going anywhere, and neither are we, but as we move forward, we must adapt, learn, and above all, remember that the work we do isn't just about cataloguing the strange and supernatural, but it's about protecting people, preserving knowledge, and making sense of the unknown. So as we step into the new year, there's a lot of work to be done, but the team we've got and the plans we've put in place, I'm confident that the archives will continue to stand as a beacon, albeit a secretive one, against the ever-encroaching darkness. As we close this chapter and prepare for what lies ahead, I'll leave you with a glimpse of our next investigation, one that's haunted my thoughts for years. We call it the House of Lonely Souls. It's a phenomena like both comforting and insidious, a place of refuge for the lost, the weary, and the broken, but it's not a place without its price. Those who find solace within its walls often leave behind more than they bargained for. So join me next time when we delve into these mysteries of this enigmatic dwelling, uncovering the stories of those who've sought shelter there and the unsettling truths they left behind. Felix out. Have a lovely New Year's.